Hi, I'm Carol Colbeck, and I'm really pleased to share with you today what I've learned about changes made in 11 departments by the result of their members engaging with Midwest Great Plains Pulse. Just a little about me to get started. I'm a retired professor and administrator of higher education administration. I worked at Penn State Center for the Study of Higher Education. I was dean at University of Massachusetts, Boston, and I was dean and then closed out my career as professor of education at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. Along the way, I taught graduate courses in multicultural leadership, strategic planning, organizational theory, organizational change, and qualitative methods. And believe me, I know from experience how challenging it can be to affect change in higher education departments and institutions. Perhaps because of that, I've particularly enjoyed working with the Pulse organization over the last 5 years and helping them and working with them on some evaluation efforts. And so that's how I became involved with doing an evaluation of the Midwest Great Plains Pulse effort. Midwest Great Plains, as Michael has probably already told you, offers 2 to 3 day regional in-person workshops for teams of 3 to 5 members of departments to help them practice and use the tools of facilitative leadership and creative problem solving, and develop those skills and access other resources so they can identify goals and develop action plans to attain them. In addition, Midwest Great Plains deliberately encourages the departments to network with each other across the 13-state Midwest Great Plains region. There are 5 sub-regional sub-hubs that make resource sharing and mutual support easier. And in addition, I know, including from some of my conversations with department representatives for this evaluation, that departments get together or help each other out by phone or in person in between regional meetings. By the way, facilitative leadership involves all members of a group to align goals and on the way to achieve goals. It involves a lot of trust and respect. And creative problem solving invites voices from all, even those whose perspectives appear to diverge from the majority, to challenge their own assumptions and come up with innovative solutions to challenges, including implementing anti-racist actions. And all Pulse efforts are informed by Vision and Change, a groundbreaking report from the the American Association for the Advancement of Science in 2011, designed to encourage folks across the country and indeed beyond to enhance the outcomes of undergraduate biology programs so that we will really have a literate, scientifically literate populace. And so the biology programs will be teaching the way that students actually learn and help close achievement gaps. So as I tell the stories connected with this qualitative evaluation of 11 departments, I encourage you to consider whether you've been involved for 4 or 5 years or this is your first meeting with Midwest Great Plains Pulse. How does your own department fit or not the stories that I share with you today? What lessons and change might work in your department? And what might you and your department contribute to the overall Midwest Great Plains Pulse story now and on into the future? This evaluation is what's called a formative evaluation, and it focuses on collecting data within the, say, first half of an overall project in order to improve implementation, help solve unanticipated problems, and make sure that participants are progressing toward desired outcomes. And it's that last point that I'll particularly be addressing in my remarks today. The formative evaluation also provides insights that can be used later for the summative evaluation to judge the overall effectiveness of a program. And that for Midwest Great Plains will happen at the end of their current National Science Foundation grant, which is a couple of years from now. My questions were, what types of changes have the departments attempted? What progress has been made toward each change? How has Midwest Great Plains PULSE assisted departments with changes? What other forces assisted or impeded accomplishment of changes? And what changes do representatives perceive in their own identities as well as their department's identities? To conduct this formative qualitative evaluation, I conducted interviews lasting from anywhere from about 45 minutes to an hour and 45 minutes with representatives of 11 life sciences departments who have been participating with Midwest Great Plains for the last 2 to 5 years. They included a broad cross-section of institutional types. They were evenly distributed almost between public and private institutions, and certainly varied in size. And they were located in 5 greatly distributed Midwest Great Plains geographic sub-hubs across the 13-state region. The representatives with whom I spoke acted as what Deborah Meyerson would call tempered radicals. In her 2001 study of change, tempered radicals quietly challenged prevailing wisdom of leadership, like academic leadership, as herding cats. They enlisted colleagues to attempt significant changes to improve the cultures in their work units in order to foster meaningful work and meaningful change. Now, the departments in this study were located, as I said, across the Midwest. But I'm not going to share any other identifying information of the individuals or the departments with you because I promise to protect their confidentiality. I didn't do anything to pre-specify the types of changes or assisters or barriers that folks would discuss. Rather, I wanted to hear what representatives had to say on their own. When I had transcripts, I reviewed them many times to perceive similarities and differences across these questions that I asked, so I could come up with categories that I'm sharing with you today. I asked them what were the 2 most significant changes their departments had attempted since engaging with PULSE. Now, 2 times 11 is 22, but there were only 20 changes. The changes themselves are the unit of analysis of this part of the evaluation, because 2 representatives discussed only one change. Then I asked each participant to talk about the progress toward and the processes used for each attempted change, and to discuss the barriers and assisters to change. So, the 4 types of change included teaching and assessment. Those were the most frequently attempted changes at 7 each. Most of the teaching changes involved incorporating more active learning or undergraduate research in courses. 1 involved recruiting new faculty members for teaching excellence. Among the 7 assessment changes, 2 started with specifying overall learning outcomes, and 4 went beyond to try overall assessment of student learning, including the student learning outcomes, which is a subset. And 1 addressed evaluation of teaching effectiveness. The 4 curriculum changes all started with introductory biology courses. and 3 of them expanded to include more of the biology curriculum. And finally, although improving department dynamics was part of every change effort, there were 2 change efforts that were specifically about improving the way that folks in the department interacted with each other using PULSE strategies. And as I looked at the changes, I realized that there were 3 different states of change. The first, and the most frequent, wonderfully enough, was change that was accomplished by whole departments, by all and most members of the departments. The second, in departments that were pretty complex and challenging to get much done in, there were 2 mid-career faculty who led efforts by small cohorts to accomplish change within the departments. And then there were 4 changes sincerely attempted, but that were halted or postponed indefinitely because of internal department dynamics or because of upper-level administrative changes or some combination. This table cross-references the 4 types of changes with the 3 states of change, which enables us to see if you combine those changes accomplished by whole departments or accomplished by whole cohorts. It's 16 changes, or 80% of the total 20 changes were accomplished, and only 20% were derailed. The attempted changes in teaching and curriculum had the highest rate of accomplishment in this sample, whether by whole departments or small cohorts. The attempted changes to assessment were accomplished slightly more than half the time. And a reason for the differences in rates is likely because 3 assessment change attempts occurred in very complex departments and also faced barriers from administrators. More on these issues later. To make this come alive, I'm going to share with you quotes from 4 of the representatives who talked with me that show the interaction of types and states of change. The first one, a teaching change, was accomplished by a whole department, and it involved a department decision to require a cure course for all biology majors that would require engagement in real research. The faculty member said, "We talk about the cure courses a lot at faculty meetings, and we've had a couple of faculty retreats over the past year or so, where this course in particular has come up." Then, as I mentioned, assessment changes sometimes bumped into barriers that were not necessarily the fault of the department itself, and this is a great example. In this case, a department made a lot of progress before needing to stop. And I'll let the representatives speak for themselves. We decided that we wanted to redevelop entirely the department learning outcomes for our programs. It was a task the institution had been asking us to do for a long time. We took time in the fall department retreat of 2 consecutive years. We had a mini workshop with the faculty in which everybody was handed a copy of Vision and Change. There was brainstorming, an initial list of things that faculty valued. We went through an exercise of mapping our core courses to see where we mapped in terms of coverage of the 5 core concepts and core competencies of Vision and Change. Things slowed down and stopped with the 3rd meeting, because then we had another change in leadership, and unfortunately, work just kept stopping. Both small cohort changes were accomplished in what I categorized as complex departments, meaning they were either multidisciplinary, distributed across more than one campus in a single institution, or in an institution where biology was distributed across several departments, or some combination of these two characteristics. As I mentioned, department complexity was a barrier to some department changes, but two small cohorts within them still accomplished desired changes guided by PULSE principles. In this first example, a small cohort of junior and part-time faculty agreed to select and use a single textbook for the intro bio course taught across multiple campuses. And up till this point, the individual offerings bore little resemblance to each other. And there was concern that students were getting a very uneven experience, and an A in one wouldn't necessarily mean even a B or a C in another. The representative said, "We all voted, and we definitely had a democratic process to pick the book. We had many meetings. We reviewed 5 books, and we invited 4 different publishers to come in and give us presentations. It was an entire semester process that was at least partially guided by some PULSE ideas." The second example begins to show the tremendous effort another department gave to hold a department change in the way they work together. The representative said, and by the way, this was a leader in the department who acknowledged that this leader used to talk too much. The representative said, we had to figure out how to not talk over others. We implemented a step that you had to pass around before you could talk. And I was kind of the moderator in the bailiff, but I didn't really try to engage the conversations a lot unless I needed clarity. I made everybody else be highly engaged so they could do all the talking. It worked out. Okay, now you have a sense of the types and states of change. Now I'm going to share with you what the representatives talked about in terms of their assisters and barriers to change that they perceived or that came up as their departments or their small cohorts were working towards changes. Comparing across the 11 interviews, I categorized 6 assisters associated with Midwest Great Plains PULSE, 5 other types of assisters, and 4 change barriers. Notice there's 11 assisters and only 4 change barriers. Overall, these representatives were a pretty positive group. I'll start with the 6 Midwest Great Plains PULSE assisters of change. Group process involved using specific methods to improve the interactions among department members and make decisions. And that you can certainly see was used very frequently across all of the states of change. Planning involved clarifying vision and challenge, forging a solution, and outlining an implementation process for a specific goal. And this assister also was used quite frequently, whether change was to accomplish by whole departments, small cohorts, or even derail. In any department, there are going to be some, it seems, who resist change, even as the rest of the group may be moving toward consensus. And with PULSE, representatives and their colleagues learned specific techniques, either to use in group process or in individual conversations, to hear and understand the concerns of resistors and help them move forward. And you notice that this was mentioned in all 14 of the whole department accomplished changes. Vision and Change, that document from AAAS, isn't specifically a Midwest Great Plains Pulse Assister. And yet it's foundational and incorporated in just about everything that they do. So I included it here. And certainly representatives talked about using those recommendations to inspire and guide their changes. And networking is a specific aim of the Midwest Great Plains Pulse effort. Not only did they bring the departments together for the workshops, but encourage collaborative interactions in between meetings. And the representatives who talked to me mentioned networking quite a bit, particularly in whole department accomplished changes. And finally, if you're not familiar with them, Pulse has developed a set of rubrics to enable departments to self-assess themselves, to identify and plan which changes they may want to initiate, say in teaching practices or curriculum or how they work together. And Pulse rubrics were mentioned in the accounts of the process for 6 accomplished changes. The other assisters of change included those happy campuses where the departments felt there was support from upper-level administrators and officials and or the overall culture of the institution. And when that happened, as you can see, it was mentioned frequently. It was a real assister. Representatives also mentioned other assisters of change in terms of like an external reviewer who recommended the department's first contact with Midwest Great Plains Pulse, as well as the large number of other organizations who are also drawing upon vision and change to reform undergraduate biology and other science education. And so this collaboration, this overall climate of folks working across efforts in the same direction, excuse me, certainly had an impact for many of these change efforts. Another thing that had an impact, a positive impact that assisted, was if the department already had a culture that was congruent with Pulse values prior to engaging with Pulse. And as you can see, that surfaced in accounts of 9 of 14 accomplished changes, as well as even one change that was derailed. Although it's a Pulse group, it's not Midwest Great Plains, and Pulse ambassadors provide development workshops on campus for all members of the department. And 4 of the changes were assisted by departments engaging Pulse ambassadors in addition to their engagement with Midwest Great Plains. The last assister is not something that was told to me by the department representatives. It's something that I observed from analyzing the data, because I was trying to make sense of everything that I had learned, and I realized that some of the changes were more easily accomplished, perhaps because they were accomplished in departments all located on one campus and all biology, and that ranged in size actually from about 7 to 25 people. And there were 4 barriers to change, and all of these were mirror images of the other assisters. The first is administrators who were not supportive, or when there was dramatic or frequent leadership changes. Of course, that would be a barrier. And in contrast to the supportive and congruent pre-existing pre-Pulse culture, when there was already dysfunctional or initial resistance to change of any kind among department members, that also impeded change. And that surfaced in one small cohort and 3 derailed changes. Something that came up in just 2 changes, 1 accomplished and 1 derailed. but sounds like it was really challenging in those two cases, is when, despite efforts with the good group dynamics support from Midwest Great Plains Pulse, there were individuals or small groups of individuals who continued to resist change and just stuck with it. And then finally, the last barrier to change is the opposite of the simple department structure. It's the complex department structure. Departments that are multidisciplinary, distributed across several campuses, or the department is one of several life sciences departments on a single campus. And this complexity added another layer of barriers to accomplishing change. And this was true even in whole departments that accomplished change. It certainly reduced the chances for the small cohort changes to grow to whole department changes, and it negatively affected to derail changes. Now, this table pulls together some of this data to show that when I combine whole department or small cohort accomplished changes and compare that to the derailed changes, that the total number of assisters, both Midwest Great Plains Pulse assisters and other assisters, employed or activated or used by department members were far greater. And the average number of assisters per change for the whole departments and small cohort accomplished changes than they were for the derailed changes. Similarly, derailed changes, according to representatives' accounts, dealt with a larger share of barriers. So that helps explain the differences in why some changes were accomplished and some were not. Of course, it's important to remember here that some barriers were, or their corresponding assisters were a matter of context. It was a lot easier to accomplish a change in a simple department where there was a supportive administration than in a department that was very complex. So there was a lot of administrative turbulence. But deliberate choices also make a positive difference, such as taking advantage of Midwest Great Plains networking, tools for process and replanning, and tools like Vision and Change in the Pulse rubrics, and Pulse ambassadors, if the department felt the extra support would be helpful. My next finding is that the Midwest Great Plains Pulse assisters mentioned most frequently by representatives as used during the attempted whole department and that should be 14 whole department and 2 small cohort changes, or 4 derailed changes, are consistent with all 3 Midwest Great Plains stated goals: group process, planning, and overcoming resistance. When you look at the accounts, they're a really good resemblance to the Midwest Great Plains goals of creative problem solving and facilitative leadership. And you can see that they played a great role in whole and small cohort change, and even some in derailed changes. Similarly, networking played a distinctive role in 10 of 14 whole department and small cohort changes. I just want to put in a plug right here to say that the third workshop in this online series on July 29 will address facilitative leadership and creative problem solving. And I really encourage you to participate. The third finding was participation in Midwest Great Plains Pulse delivered benefits, even when the department change was not accomplished, according to representatives. And this quote from one gives it a hint of that. This person said, I've been to a lot of conferences. The mode of what Pulse does at the Pulse conference to me is so much more constructive than listening to a keynote, having lunch, walking around. That sort of stuff can certainly be helpful and useful, but it's not the same as what Pulse does, which is, okay, now you're going to sit down and do this work. And you have to show us what you do at the end. You have to share out, and it has to be something you can follow through on and develop that whole plan. And not surprisingly, the last finding is that participation in Midwest Great Plains Pulse delivered benefits when whole department change was accomplished. The representative said and described the process. Things were laid out, steps that you could do to change your department. That was really impressive to me because changing a department seems like a very nebulous thing. A good idea, but how do you actually do it? The fact that Pulse provides a way through the rubrics to put those things on paper and think about specific things that need to be changed is really helpful. A lot of people might think, my department needs to change, but who needs to change isn't quite tangible, or what needs to change and how to change it is not quite tangible. I think Pulse provides both of those things in a really specific way. Another thing I was interested in, because identity, both individual and group, plays as a signifier. It helps signal whether change is being effective. And so I asked participants to share with me their sense of how their identities might have changed in relation to participating in Midwest Great Plains Pulse, as well as their departments. So with individuals, our participants' identities, such as scholars of teaching and learning or agents of positive change, broadening from their engagement with Midwest Great Plains Pulse. And how, if at all, does a department's identity, the collective sense of what does it mean to be who we are, change from engagement with Midwest Great Plains Pulse? As I share these reflections, I encourage you to reflect on identity changes you see in yourself or your department since engaging with Midwest Great Plains Pulse, or changes you'd like to see in you or your department as you begin to engage. Again, I have some quotations from participants to illustrate the 6 who talked about being a change agent or changes in themselves as a teacher, and the 2 who talked about becoming a more inclusive leader. Now, this quote incorporates both the first 2, change agent and teacher. Sitting through the Pulse workshops made me understand that if you have the skills to do it and you could be passionate about the work, that you had to be a campus leader. And then that way, you could affect the most change. And so that structure was exactly what I was looking for myself, even in some of the things that I do now with designing my own courses. Then even using the sort of convergent, divergent thinking that surfaces in Midwest Great Plains Pulse workshops, I should say. And this person said, I've developed a few modules like that for my students. And another person said, it's not been my objective as an individual to make sure everybody is included, whereas the Pulse approach is you need to try to find a way to get them all included. I think that's really good advice. Your department identity changes. I'm going to discuss 4. The first, focusing on students' learning experiences and their outcomes. For example, the department revised its mission statement in light of vision and change and is trying to make a more consistent experience for each student, making sure that the things we think are important are really covered. So that's incorporated in the mission statement for ethics. The next identity change for the department focuses on the reputation, how others perceive the department. We are seen both internally and by others in the institution as being those people who really care about teaching. Or better department dynamics. A representative said, "We all do a better job of communicating and listening to each other and really working together to form goals, to create department-wide goals that go beyond just as us as individuals for our own classes." And finally, one person talked about network in relation to identity, saying, "We're certainly better networked with other regional institutions and feel more comfortable calling them and say, 'Hey, I want to do this.'" I want to conclude my remarks with a disclaimer and with some questions for reflection that I encourage you to consider. I did not invite participants to tell me only positive things about their department change experiences, nor did I anticipate that I would hear so many good things about their own or their department's experiences. Certainly I heard challenges faced along the way, especially as department colleagues resisted working together in new ways, or refused to stop teaching the courses they believed that they owned, or some especially daunting administrative contacts. Nevertheless, I heard mostly positive experiences, and not just as one representative indicated they jumped the Kool-Aid. I've worked within several cultural change efforts in universities in my own career. With them, as with Pulse, I saw colleagues who persevered through challenging interactions to effect changes they believed mattered because the changes would make learning experiences better for students, faculty, and administrators. And they were more than ready to tell stories of what had been gained as a result of their collective efforts. So with this, as I conclude, I ask you to reflect and consider, what do these evaluation findings suggest to you about your own current story and about your future story? And using my, meaning you, about your own current department's current story, and how might my department use ideas from this evaluation to make our own work together even more effective? And what would be helpful to improve our ongoing learning and working together? And now I conclude by saying we're going to move from this recording into a live question, answer, comment section, and I welcome what you have to say, your questions, and any experiences you'd like to share. Thank you very much.